In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. I have a few exciting updates to share in our intro today. First, I'll start with my collaboration with Phobiz. I partnered with Phobiz over the last few months here to develop and release two courses on AI application and exploration, particularly for educators. My second course is now live. This course is titled Creating Educational Visuals with AI Image Generators. I will post a link in the show notes if you're interested in checking it out on the Phobiz platform. Put a lot of my effort, energy, enthusiasm, excitement into developing this course. I really hope that you enjoy it. Course is about 60 minutes, and I'm sharing everything that I know about how to make really exciting visuals with AI image generators so that you can continue to apply them within your work. Let's jump into today's episode. While many of our conversations have covered good ground around AI and education impacts, there's one big topic that I don't feel like I've done due diligence and really highlighting, and I think it's an important one: cybersecurity. If we as individuals and our organizations can leverage AI tools, that means that also bad actors can do that, and they intend to use AI for harm. So, how might bad actors try to use AI to threaten our schools and districts? What can be done to prevent or stop any cyber attacks? In today's conversation, I talk with Jay Hochstetler, founder of Symasis, a cybersecurity firm providing affordable cybersecurity solutions for organizations. Jay has decades of experience in cybersecurity roles, such as Chief Information Security Officer. Jay and I talk about the impact of AI on digital threats to schools, how threats have evolved over the decades, and Jay was even gracious enough to run a very particular assessment called an OSINT on me in particular, which is basically a test cybersecurity firms can do to analyze what information you have out there in the digital world on you. Let's just say that I braced myself and I was still surprised at what Jay found. I'm also excited to announce that I partnered with Jay and Symasis to bring cybersecurity solutions to organizations as we enter this world of AI. I love the approach that Jay is bringing to offer affordable security solutions, and I see cybersecurity as one of the biggest needs for all schools, districts, and organizations. That being said, Symasis is offering a free vulnerability scan to any listeners of the AI education conversation. If you'd like a report on the status of your current protection and controls for your organization, you can feel free to reach out to me, click on the link in the show notes, or reach out to Jay at his email in the show notes to take advantage of that offer. Regardless of whether or not you choose Symasis or another provider, I hope that you will consider ramping up your cybersecurity. Data breaches, malware, ransomware attacks are all on the rise with AI and can cripple operations and expose your people. As an additional resource, if you want to take steps to protect yourself and are wondering if your emails and your information have been exposed to data breaches historically, I added another resource that I recently heard of called haveibeenpwned.com. That pwned is PWNED. I will post that link in the show notes so you can check it. The site is really interesting because it allows you to share, it will share with you any instances where your data was breached based on an email you provide so that you can see when those attacks may have happened. Really hope you enjoy my conversation with Jay. If you're interested in my takeaways, sign up for the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com. I share all show notes with my community 12 hours before sharing my social media networks. If you want to continue supporting the podcast, really appreciate those ratings, those reviews, those share on social media, those recommendations to a colleague. Finally, if your school, district, or organization is ready to explore AI and make a change, I am available for workshops and coaching at the AIeducationconversation.com. Humans at the heart of education. Enjoy the episode. Jay Hochstetler, welcome to the AI Education Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so really excited to just have this conversation. I know that you and I recently really excited to have these collaborations together with your great work with Symasis. And I'd actually like to start there. Can you give us a little bit of background on just where you're coming from entering the space, as well as the work that you're now doing with Symasis?
Well, thank you very much. So I've been working in IT and security technology for about the past 25 years, starting with the U.S. military, working in the transportation industry, finance, and a little bit in healthcare. And then most recently with Symasis, starting my own consulting company. But I think my main purpose behind Symasis was I seen a lot of the the gaps that were happening with the small and medium-sized businesses, how they're often getting overlooked, not only by the larger companies to really help them secure their organizations, but a lot of the dependencies on technology companies, their assumption that IT companies are also securing their organizations, which in many times they are, but there's a lot of gaps with that happening as well. So that was my main focus as I started Symasis to focus on the small and medium sized organizations.
It's really helpful to have somebody who has your profile coming on and having this conversation with me. I've been very interested in having conversations about cybersecurity with all that we've learned about artificial intelligence here for a while now. And I have some hypotheses that I want to test with you today, but I think before
Sure.
we really get there, I'd like for you to maybe help us to calibrate a little bit for what this experience has looked like for school districts, maybe higher education institutions. So before we talk about the AI piece, as you just mentioned, you've been in cybersecurity for decades. How have you seen the digital risks against school districts and higher education institutions evolve over the past 20 years?
No, absolutely. That's a very good question on that. So, my start was back in the early 80s, the mid 80s, working with our computers and getting in trouble for making infinite loops and crazy things like that. But if we jump into the early, about the past 20 years, as cybersecurity threats were really starting to evolve, the threats were more on the like the viruses and the worms, where phishing and spam, some of the basic attacks. The threat actors, they weren't necessarily targeting for specific types of data, but they were really looking for how can I disrupt the school systems, or how can I just generally steal data for to really cause a disruption and cause some people to harm. Really, there was a limited network entry point, so we didn't really have in the early 2000s the remote learning, a lot of the different aspects of that. So there was one attack focus on on-premise networks. As we came into the early 2000s, 2010s, we've seen the introduction of ransomware and what's called APTs, so those advanced persistent threats, which allowed organizations, threat actors to really breach organizations and sit undetected in their organizations for a period of time, really to look around and start really targeting and build profiles on those organizations to really understand the data they would really like to steal. And then obviously with ransomware, that was a big threat, and it still is today, but it's really developed as it's over the past 20 years. In the early days of ransomware, they would lock up your systems and demand a payment. If you would make a payment, obviously you would get your data back most of the time, but it's a business model. So that they had the best interest in to release your data. They really started focusing more on educational data, student data, looking for that PII, research data as well too. With the introduction to the early 2010s, we started seeing the Internet of Things, people bringing their own devices, as well as the cloud, the adoption to cloud. So moving from on-premise networks to the cloud environment brought a whole nother level of threats to organizations as well, as they try to have to secure those. Seen a lot more of the growing awareness for organizations, really trying to train their organization, both the users and students, on what to do and what not to do. But that's constantly a battle that we're seeing even today with organizations. As we move into 2020s, so over the past 5 years or so, that's where we're really seeing the introduction of AI and the AI threats. AI powered attacks. If you take the traditional malware that comes out, now we have the advanced malware that is driven by AI, where it has the ability to adapt and learn your environment and then enhance that threat and that attack. Multiple attack vectors. So now we're looking not just on premise, but external as well. As we looked into, especially around the 2020 timeframe, with organizations going to remote learning and remote access into the organizations, we've seen organizations pushing it out, but they were not ready for that yet. So that brought a whole host of risks and threats, especially on the VPN access, where they didn't have the devices to hand out, and they allowed users to utilize their personal devices in the inside network of the inside portion of the networks. That was a huge risk on that. As we look at some of the remote learning and the hybrid models, that definitely was enhanced by the COVID-19. That brought a whole host of threats, lots of weaknesses in the remote access that caused different problems. But yeah, so that's kind of moving from the early 2000s up to today. just the past 5 years with AI has really enhanced the threat of vectors that attackers can take advantage.
Yeah, that really resonates. And I think what stands out to me and what you said is number one, it's so many different ways. It sounds like the target for what hackers and threats and viruses are hoping to get when they're exploiting school districts and higher education seems to be about the same. It seems to still be targeted towards trying to find creative ways towards stealing people's personal data, stealing student data, and a lot of purposes for the intention of locking it down or stealing it to be able to sell it back to the school district. And I even in some recent headlines with some major school districts like LAUSD over the past 6 months, I've seen that appears to continue to be the case even 20 years into this. It sounds like there's just more sophisticated ways in which they are successfully being able to do that in this perpetual cat and mouse game, right? Between
Well, it
the
is.
attackers and the defenders here, right? One thing to kind of right size this a little bit though. So what I also took away from what you said is it sounds like in certain ways over the last 5 years, maybe since the start of the pandemic, it sounds like the threat has been exacerbated. And I guess the reason I'm drawing that conclusion based on what you said is I think you said that and this is absolutely true, I think, in the context of education, which is so many school districts during the pandemic decided to go to one-to-one devices for students, or
Right.
they were expanding significantly on the amount of laptops or tablets that they were deploying onto their schools. And even in that process of transitioning to that, a lot of folks now were able to just use personal devices to be able to do a lot of the work that they were having to do or hop on Zoom calls or those types of things. And then I think what I was just hearing you saying is that in that expansion, there was a lot of threats that are potentially created, a lot of vulnerabilities that are created in that process. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. So if you have a company managed device where you have company managed antivirus, anti-malware protection controls, you can control the vulnerability scans on the device. You can ensure that it's locked down and it's hardened. When you start going outside of that, allowing personal devices, you can't control my device. I could be at home doing whatever and have all kinds of malware on my system. And if you're allowing me to connect to your organization, uh, unprotected, if you will, that opens up the door to allow the transfer of risk right into the organization. Now, there are some things you can do to manage that as you're looking more to the virtual networks on that, but it just increases the risk significantly.
Got it. So just yeah, just the sheer volume of devices that you're having
Right,
in your school district on your organization creates some added vulnerabilities that organizations might have to be working through. And potentially over the last couple of years, we've gotten better at catching up. But given how quickly this happened, where so many school districts had a cart of laptops that they were willing
right,
into classrooms, and then now every student has one, or you have your cell phones and those things as well. Seems like it's creating a lot more entry points for these types of things to be able to exploit school districts and to steal that personal data with the intention of selling it back to them or to just lock
right.
it down or do something else with it as well.
Yeah, but you,
You
you
had
actually made
oh,
a
go ahead.
good point there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you made a
Yeah,
good
no worries.
point there as far as selling it back to them. So that's another thing that we've seen coming from the 2010s and 2020s is the espionage. So it's another component within the ransomware. Probably before we talked about we're going to lock up your data, you pay a ransom, and we'll unlock your data. But they're also pulling data off your network, so they have that second level. All right, you paid it once, but now we have your data, and if you don't pay us again, we're going to release it to the public. Or if you have good
Mm,
backups and you don't need to pay it the first time, they have that second level to pull money from you.
yeah. No, that's yeah, it's scary. And again, I know that oftentimes when we're talking about that student data, a lot of folks may wonder, is it or do we actually need to be worried about some of those things being stolen? But again, in my experience, having worked for in district roles and things like that, there is quite a few sensitive things that come up. It's not just grades and student names and emails that
Right.
we're worried about, which oftentimes you're like, oh, maybe there's not much a hacker could do with that. I honestly don't know. You would know better than I would. But there's even instances too where there's addresses in there. In certain instances, I've even seen systems that have social security numbers, right, with for students in there. So even if in those
And
particular
healthcare
instances
information
now,
too.
exactly your healthcare information. So even if they did not want to sell that back to you, obviously having access to a bunch of social security numbers for our young people and those things, and then they're leveraging those. That's a very terrifying scenario to think about
Right.
having all of these young people who are not having to use their socials yet for likely for a lot of theirs, and then finding out when they're 18 years old and then they're trying to use it that had been stolen from them.
Right.
So being able to secure that and to protect our young people. And again, the staff who is also involved, obviously, and there's going to be a lot more pieces as well with them is I think of utmost importance. You had also alluded to this into the first piece that you said around with artificial intelligence. I think I heard you say the threat now is becoming so much more sophisticated. Can you walk me through with the emergence of especially like generative AI, but I imagine there's other types of artificial intelligence too on this cybersecurity side that we're referring to. How has this made it more difficult to prevent attacks or to shore up some of those vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So that's sometimes we think about AI as just that regenerative AI that we can use in the classroom, use some of the threats. How do we validate the content you created is not AI generated? But when you step outside and you start looking at the security aspect of, you brought it up before, it's a cat and mouse game. It's AI versus AI in many cases. So as they're developing the AI malware and the AI threat defenses, the bad actors are also purchasing the same systems that you're using and spending millions of dollars on how to counteract that and to fight that as well. So it's a high level of cat and mouse back and forth on that.
So in my research of AI, I think some of the data points that concern me on the security front are the following. I think number one, my understanding is that at the highest and most sophisticated level, there is already many countries who engage in state-sponsored cybersecurity attacking of other countries for
Right.
different regions for those purposes. And this is in some instances historically without the tapping in of artificial intelligence type technology to just make that process more seamless and in many cases prolific, right? Because what I think folks, many of us may still be understanding is that we are not only in a moment now where we have chatbots and generative AI tools where if you are putting in a demand, it will then provide an output. But we're also in a world now where there's a lot of companies using AI agents for positive regions, right? And AI
Right.
agents can be leveraged for really positive use cases, such as in the medical field, they're being used to do research nonstop, 24/7 to find compounds and chemicals and different interactions, which can hopefully solve some of our biggest health crises. But I can also imagine how these same AI agents, especially in the hands of institutions, right, with a lot more resources, can be used to make these attacks much more sophisticated.
Right.
They can also be again nonstop. Right now, we're talking about something that doesn't. This is not a person who goes home and goes to sleep and then comes back and gets at it again. This is now 24/7 type things. And what I get concerned about is I imagine that on the totem pole as it relates to some of these experiences for these types of institutions, education institutions are probably lower on the list. They're probably going for much higher leverage opportunities there. But at the same
Right.
time, if you have a technology that doesn't sleep, it does make me wonder how many layers away we are removed from this now being the target, that being within the crosshairs, and then thinking about how much more advanced this technology is at being able to just full speed ahead go towards a directive that it's being provided.
Right. Yeah, you touched on a couple key areas right there. So as part of one of the areas where AI is really taking effect on that is the same type of attacks, but just making them more advanced. So if you think of malware is developed for a certain type of operating system, a certain vulnerability, and then it takes a certain action. If it sees both those characters come together. Now with AI malware, it's adaptive. So basically, if it comes into an organization and sees a certain operating system that it done traditionally would be programmed, it can adapt and change, and then it can look for multiple vulnerabilities. Then once it gets in your organization, it can then go through the data and say, "All right, what is the best attack vector to compromise this organization?" So before, where it's just a single couple steps, it has if then statements. If this happens, then do this or stop. Now it's basically adapting itself and allowing for the creation of one variant, if you will, that can take over many different types of organizations and different systems. So it's definitely very concerning in that aspect.
Yeah. The other layer of this that I'm really concerned about is and I'm curious to get your read on this because so in my understanding of cybersecurity and just some of the potential exploitations of how these individuals and institutions can access systems is through what I'm understanding are phishing schemes, right? Where they're essentially sending an email or some kind of meteor message to get an individual to
Right.
basically permit them access to the system, right? An individual is, and again, we've all seen probably the cliches of the 90s and early 2000s and shows like The Office, you're getting the email from the Nigerian prince, right? And you
Right.
click on this and he's going to give you $20 million or all that. And we may get a good laugh at that. But I have recently talked to a lot of individuals where today in 2024, that's not the scheme anymore. It's not a laughable ha 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 like
Right.
I'm getting $20 million. It is now instances where folks are recording a loved one based on a social media post and saying,
Right.
"Hey, we have your son," and then playing an audio clip of your son and saying, "We are going to hurt your son if you don't, click on this or you don't send us money," and using those
Right.
types of like these what are this deep fake technology to be able to take sound or audio or images or make the framing a lot more sophisticated to then really exploit an individual on a much higher stakes level and personal level than what it
Right.
sounds like it was before.
No, absolutely. And that's, if you look at the deep fakes, just how much it's advanced in the past 2 years. I think I remember seeing one of the ones, it probably was no more than 2 years ago, of it was either Will Smith or The Rock, I think, eating a bowl of spaghetti. And it was just chopped up. It's like, this is pretty cool. But I mean, it was very infancy stages of the video. But now you can't tell. You have to have AI to detect AI deep fakes on that. And the audio recordings as well, too. It's very concerning because with a 30-second clip of a person's voice, you can create entire dialogue and then once you start putting in the AI behind that, now you can actually have conversations with your voice and throw people off. And that's messed up not only the calls to like grandparents for trying to get money, but also within meetings, teams meetings, and different types of communication tool sets where people are being fooled because not only AI video, but the audio as well too is matching up and adapting to the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes me think if you work in a really large organization as an example, and you have somebody who's 2 layers removed from you that is in a very much a higher positional authority role as you, maybe somebody you're not interacting with often, and then all of a sudden you're getting an audio clip or an email that sounds like it could be them, it sounds like their voice, and you actually
Right.
don't know them well enough to know whether or not they would ever send this to you. It feels like some of those instances are just primed to be something that can exploit larger organizations if we are now not coming into organizations and training these orgs to know, okay, even in these instances where it passes a little bit of the sniff test because you see the title, you see these things, it sounds like the voice,
Right.
maybe take a second and pause, look even further now because of some of this technology that can be used to really cause harm onto your organization and to your stakeholders here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to some of the basics. So the threat before was receiving an email, a spoofed email from your executive saying, "Hey, we need to transfer this money immediately." And what is the process? Stop. You need to have user training as well as policies, dual controls in place, and even more now because now it's not just email that has been spoofed, but now you have an audio and or a video from that person saying, "We need to send this money," or whatever the demand might be. It's the same thing. You need to have the policies in place and training, and then not just sit on the shelf. You need to go through that and repeat that and make sure the teams have a good understanding.
So, Jay, I guess my next question is in 2024 with all the things that are out there that feel in my opinion much scarier than it has before. Are we doomed? Like, are organizations doomed? And is there anything organizations or individuals for that matters? I think we just talked about a lot of individual potential exploitations here that these tools can have. Like, is there anything we can do at the org or the individual level to try to push back against these very sophisticated technologies that can cause harm?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes back to some of the basics as we talked about before. So the same as it before, if malware is going to attack your organization, it has to have a vulnerability. Yes. And for that, the AI, it's still advanced enough, but they're still looking for that vulnerability in your organization. So basic cyber hygiene is really where organizations need to start. And where I've seen a lot of the smaller colleges and universities, as well as local governments, a lot of time are lacking in just the very basics. So instead of focusing on the latest and greatest uh, tricks to do, you got to keep those in mind. But you got to go back to the point where you're doing vulnerability scans and vulnerability management organization to make sure your systems are patched. You have good backups. So there's a whole host of the very basics that need to happen. It comes back to those cybersecurity measures to conduct frequent cybersecurity assessments. Organizations doing a lot of great things, but a lot of times they're scattered all over. The IT system organizations doing some things, HR is doing some great things. They really pull that together, and I think especially on the insurance side. They're expecting organizations to have uh, a cybersecurity framework that they're following. They give them the flexibility to follow one of their choice. There's the NIST cybersecurity framework, the Center for Internet Security Controls, critical security controls, but just really pulling it all together. And that kind of gives a framework and a foundation for an organization to follow. Just really start protecting their organization. But no, we're not doomed. Coming back to your question, we're not doomed, but it's just a step above of where we're at before. If you weren't doing something before, or if you weren't doing the core things to protect your organization before, even so now you're even more vulnerable because something that might have been overlooked by a hacker who's scanning out your organization. Now, AI is not gonna miss that. They're going to continually scan more data sets and miss, and they're not going to miss some of those, something that might not be considered low hanging fruit.
Got it. So yeah, to reflect back what you just said, really being able to focus on those fundamentals, ensuring you're adhering to a really strong, good framework that is out there, doing that hygiene, as you said, right? Really making sure you're exploring and patching those vulnerabilities. Those are all things organizations could be doing right now. And a lot of that is what I'm hearing you say was some of the work that orgs were already responsible for doing. It's just now, obviously, if you are not doing a good job at keeping up with this and being consistent with it, the technology nowadays is much more, it can be much more penalizing for your mistake as it's going to catch a lot more.
Nope, absolutely. And some of those basics include like using multi-factor authentication. That's not new. That's not just for AI threats. That's for best practice in general, not only for individuals, but for organizations. Password strength and not using the same password for all your accounts. Utilizing a password manager and making sure that your financial accounts are not the same password and username as your social media. Because I see all the time people say, my Facebook account has been hacked. Well, no, they captured your username from your Instagram account and that use a password from your Instagram account, and it worked on your Facebook account as well too. Same thing as your financial accounts. They're using the same password across the board. So if it's in one data dump, and then if you integrate AI into the scanning across for Jay Hochstetler, all his accounts out there and automatically trying that password and a combination of usernames, it's very easy to compromise that.
Ooh, yeah, that'd be a real bad day, real quick there. If
Yes.
you have the same password for everything, right, and it hacks and it now works for all of your bank accounts and your social media and all those things.
You'd
Yes,
be
that
surprised. That's still very common.
wow. Yeah, well, if hopefully if folks don't take anything else from this, take that away. Go change your passwords right now
Right.
if that is your circumstance. So I know something else that I was really excited to talk to you about, and I know one of the services that Symasis offers, which I'd not heard too much of, but it really resonated for me as something that I think a lot of individuals, especially in organizations that potentially have assets and data that needs to be protected, that could be protected, and you're looking at the individual threats there, is this thing that you were describing to me earlier called an OSINT. Can you walk me through what an OSINT is, how it helps? No.
So OSINT is open source intelligence. So it's basically information that's available on the internet without paying for. It could be considered gathered through paying, but it's just basically information that's available on the internet, whether it's through social media, business information that can be gathered through a little bit of research.
Got it. So to your point earlier about this idea of cyber hygiene, like really keeping up on it. Obviously, I think we oftentimes, based on the media, might have an understanding of how, if celebrities or athletes or folks like that aren't doing a good job at looking at their cyber hygiene, or they have posts a long time in the past that they might have regretted when they put when they were 15
Right.
or things like that out there. Something like an OSENT would do a good job at just really making sure that of across all of the pieces that you might have out there, your digital footprint, that you're protected or that you're aware of what you're putting out into the world and like how that could be used to potentially harm you. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just the information that you put out there, it's the information that your organization puts out about you, maybe your family members put out about you. And it's really designed to put together a profile on an individual or an organization to really help them understand the threats and the risks that all this information that could be gathered can then you can feed that into AI and have them do deeper digs on you.
All right. Well, that being said, I'm a little bit nervous about this, but I'm bracing myself here and I'm ready for it. So as a part of this conversation, I know that you were gracious enough and willing to do an OSINT on my profile. And so I'm curious to hear what did you find on me as you did that? Well, Daniel, Simas has found out a lot of information about you, or should I say me. They found out information about our home, our family, our accounts, passwords, and more. That's pretty scary, isn't it?
So,
Oh
so,
no.
so that right there was one of the free services that you can find on the internet to basically clone your voice and put together basically an AI generated conversation or statement, as you talked about before, that could be utilized for an individual. So that right there was just kind of the intro, kind of showing you a little bit of some of the threats that are out there.
Oh man, that it's so funny. I knew that my voice could obviously be cloned. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time researching and doing it. So I'm not unaware, but that was the first time that I've actually seen it happen. And wow, that was scary, even though I knew it could happen.
Right. Give me just one second here. I'm going to share a document here with you.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, when we decided to take a look at this, you have to have basic information on a person to know who they are. So we basically just took the information from your website. So normally you have a name and a birth date just to verify that you're seeing the right person. We just took the information from your website, and this is the information. And we spent about 2 to 3 hours. So normally for an engagement, when we're doing an investigation on a person, we can spend 20 to 40 hours on an organization or an individual to really put that
Mhm.
profile together. So this is really a pretty much quick search, and it was just information based on internet, moving back and forth across lateral movement across the internet. So we go and present here.
Yeah, and just as you're setting that up, the thing that scares me a little bit is like, oh man, you only spent 10% of of the time that you might spend on somebody else doing this for me. Let's see what's out there with the 10% effort.
Yeah, this was a low amount of effort. Let's see, it's trying to share here. All right, so some basic information: the birth date, occupation, current address, car information. And if it's come through, if something's incorrect, let me see if I can make this a little bit larger.
Yeah, that's a little bit better. And yeah, so far everything is spot on here.
All right. Email address, possible other email addresses, common password. Does that password look familiar?
It sure does. That's terrifying. I'm
All right.
literally gonna go change all my passwords right.
All right. So that's out there. Possible phone numbers, obviously Instagram and X, marriage to your wife, her birth date, occupation, where she worked at, went to school, and some of her information. So, as I mentioned before, as you can laterally move from individuals, it could be children or spouses, business associates, information they post about you as well. Is this your home?
Yep.
All right. So this right here is a threat that we see quite a bit, and this might not be from the digital threat, but this could be from the perspective of a thief, of
Yeah.
someone who wants to profile your home. And so this information here, now I can understand how your home was laid out. So basically, if I needed to develop a plan to get in and out of your home, well, here it is, that this is
It
going to be
wouldn't
that
be very
first step.
difficult.
It would
Yeah,
be very
based on
difficult.
this.
Right. So that's the end right there. But and that's with about 2 to 3 hours of effort. And I was able to do a little more. So one of the things I like to do is to be able to move through the family members, because basically a lot of times they'll put information back to you. And so, especially on your wife, you're able to find relatives and really start digging the information they might be posting. And it can definitely get very deep very quick, and you can spend a lot of time doing this type of research. And I think it really all depends. And if you think about AI can do this. We didn't integrate AI into this. This is just personal searching and looking. But if you put some information and have the bot, if you will, the agent to really start doing the search on on an individual, it's a matter of minutes to
Yeah.
really identify information and to correlate everything together.
Yeah, and that I think is my reaction coming up and like what you said, what scares me so much and just even what you shared here and some of those pieces. It's oftentimes I think folks, even folks who are pretty digitally savvy, might, as you were alluding to there, might say, well, I don't have social media. I'm pretty locked down. I don't even put stuff out there. But then to your point, now all of a sudden someone has the details of your spouse or a child, right? And is now using those things, and that in so many instances kind of hurts worse. I noticed even as you were sharing those pieces here, like some of the pieces you were sharing about me, I'm like, oh, okay. But then when you share about my wife, I was like, oh, that like
Right.
it's like I wince even harder, I think, at that. And so I don't think folks always think about that, but it's like being able to potentially influence or manipulate you could even be a loved one around you, not even your
Very.
profile.
Yes, very true. About 5 years ago, I did an assessment for a financial institution. It was for one of the C levels in the organization, and they were very confident that we wouldn't find anything on him. He said, "I don't have a social media account, so I'm safe." Took the challenge. I spent about 10 hours on the project, but his wife did, and his kids did, and she provided a lot of home addresses, information, work schedules, phone numbers, the same type of information on the home, was able to identify the kids' names, birth dates, where they go to school, what time they go to school, what school they went to, dogs' names. And one of the biggest ones we found was that their home security system was open to the internet. So we're able to see video, and I took screenshots of the video clips and provided that to them, and you could pretty much see his face go
Oh
white
my gosh. Oh, that is
because
terrifying.
it was, and it was eye opening for not only him but for the rest of the members of the executive team, because just because you don't have social media or you might have good cyber hygiene, that doesn't mean everyone else is, and it's very scary.
Yeah. Well, and even in the last thing you said too, I think nowadays too, we even if outside of school districts, this might not be the case, but I know a lot of times in homes, like folks are using little personalized cameras and those types of things throughout their house. Are you saying that a lot of those cameras you can hack into those too?
Absolutely. That is a huge threat to organizations because they're not patched regularly, or you're dependent on the manufacturer, which often comes from overseas, to update those regularly. But even with the Google devices and other Alexas and stuff, they're always listening, always recording information. A lot of times you have to say, "Okay, Google," but they're listening to that for those commands, and they're not just listening for those commands, because you probably heard in the past where one of the personal devices would assist would just blurt out of something and answering a question you didn't even talk about or say the command for. So it's definitely very concerning, not only from the hacking aspect, but the data privacy and the security aspect of it as well. Even if you look at VPNs, talk to people about you should consider utilizing a VPN. I said, why would you? I have nothing to hide. Well, why would I? If you're trying to hide something, then use a VPN. Are you a criminal? But it's even about data privacy, because if I'm sending information across the internet, you don't know who's watching that or looking at that information and capturing that. So it's about data privacy as well, not only from the aspect of I'm not trying to hide anything. Well, actually, you are. You're trying to hide your data from prying eyes.
Got it. And just, I mean, I think potentially that's common enough now to where folks know, but a VPN, that's a
I'm
virtual
sorry.
protected network, right?
Yes, a virtual private network.
Virtual private network. And it's usually like an app or an actual thing you could log into, and you log in there first. And then when you access the internet, it protects you for your searches. Is that how it works?
Yep, absolutely. Basically, it called it encrypted tunnel. So it from the type you're typing when you're going out across the internet, because the internet is unprotected, and for your destination, it's a encrypted tunnel that makes sure everything that passes through there that no one else can see. So it's an application that you can have on your phone as well as your laptops or on your network as a whole, to basically control any type of data that's flowing out is encrypted.
Got
It's
it.
just another level of protection. Organizations use this for any type of remote access into their organization. They're using those virtual private networks or some of the newer technologies as well. And especially if you're at a hotel or anywhere else, you want to make sure that you're protecting your network and you're not doing financial transactions on these unprotected networks.
Got it. So maybe just to go back for a second here to the OSINT that we just walked through, and I'm obviously feeling a little bit worried. I think my reaction is I'm still surprised and a little worried about how much information is out there. Even I feel like I've been very thoughtful about putting out there what I want out there and not what I don't want, and yet there's still some pieces like ooh like that. I'm wincing a little bit at that. So if I'm an individual or an organization that has like just gone through this process, like what's how can I now work to get that off the internet? Is there anything I can do to some of the pieces that as you were describing, like the screenshots of my home or some of those things? Like what can I do about that? Is there anything I can do?
No, yeah. If we want to touch on the home aspect of it first, so that was just basically from Zillow, I think that was the website. And so you would just want to make sure you want to go in there and you're taking all those pictures off. If you look at my home, there's a picture of an outhouse. just an outhouse. I think it came from the video game Fallout, but it's all it is. And also, I said to Google, I said I want my home blurred, so it's for the street view. So if you go to the street view of my home was blurred out, no matter which view you take a look at. So just things like that, you can really start. It's a very challenge, like you said. Once it's out there, that information's out there. There's services out there that can offer to remove you from different sites and from different databases, but it's a cat and mouse because once it's removed from one, it's coming up on another one. So again, it comes really back to taking a step back to that cyber hygiene. And really from the moving forward, you want to make sure that you're being safe, but also then start doing the little chipping away of what's out there and, really try to identify, can this be removed or what can I do to minimize the risk of the information that's out there?
Got it. So just moving forward, really, especially trying to do that. So, but now maybe to really circle back here, what about at the organization level? So I know obviously your work with Symasis is really about providing services as you described for organizations. So I'm really thinking, obviously, in our conversation about school districts, about education nonprofits, about
Right.
higher education institutions. And let's say that they've had individuals going through this process or there's other vulnerabilities. In what ways has Symasis worked with educational institutions to have their back?
Right. So basically, that's where we really tailored our solutions for the small and medium organizations at affordable price points. Because if you, smaller colleges and universities, there's not a large budget. And same thing with that's no different than a smaller business. There's smaller budgets. So some of the things that we do is we do vulnerability assessments as well as vulnerability management. So taking a periodic look at the vulnerabilities, not only your external, but in your internal networks, evaluating those and prioritize remediating those. But new vulnerabilities come out every day. So if you're only doing it once a year, we offer the one-time vulnerability service so you can get a good understanding of it. We also offer vulnerability management where we can do vulnerability scans both in your internal and external environment on a weekly, monthly basis, whatever is determined that you guys would like to tackle.
And when you say vulnerability scans on your internal and external environment, like what
Yes.
do you mean by that?
Yes. So basically, they're your external network, so your internet facing system. So what's exposed to someone anywhere around the world who's looking at your organization, your external IP addresses, your web servers, your VPN. So if I'm looking at your organization, what is the condition of those systems? What vulnerabilities or how hard and secure are those? But if I was able to breach your organization, whether it's through a vulnerability and get inside your network or possibly compromise it through a phishing or other user end type of attack. So once I'm inside your network, all your computers, your servers, your HVAC systems, they all have potential vulnerabilities as well too. So that's your internal network. So it's inside the protected network. They also need to be scanned and patched and remediated as well too.
Got it. And do you find that education institution most of the times doing a vulnerability scan and doing some of those patches is like where they really need support, or are they doing the OSINT? Are they doing other things that you've noticed that are some of the best things that would really help them protect against some of their big threats?
So yeah, so definitely for colleges, universities, and then you talk about the smaller ones because the larger universities are usually have very robust security practices in place. But so with the limited budgets, here in Indiana, we're able to the state provides and CISA, there's an organization called CISA that provides external vulnerability scans for really all types of organizations. So that basically allows organizations to test their external networks and ensure that at least the public facing side is secure. But we're seeing large gaps on the internal networks where they're often being ignored or only tested maybe once a year. So again, if I'm able to breach your network and you have all kinds of vulnerabilities inside your network, that allows me to compromise a system, get to your servers, get to your databases, and extract data out from that aspect as well. Another one would be the incident response plan and business continuity plans. So the incident response plan is designed to how do we respond to a cybersecurity incident if and when it happens. And most likely you're going to have some type of cyber incident, whether it's malware on a computer or a full breach that you need to respond to. So we help organizations build and test through tabletop exercises, their incident response plan and business continuity plans to really help ensure that they can adequately respond and recover from a cybersecurity incident. We also help organizations do gap assessments and risk assessments to cybersecurity frameworks. So we help them pull everything together. So for example, one of the common ones is the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's a best practices framework that allows organizations to really pull everything together and see how their organization is doing as compared to this framework. And then we'll help them understand the gaps and then help them remediate those at the same time as we're coming through. And it can be a process to remediate all the vulnerabilities in your environment.
Yeah, I can imagine so. I mean, between as we were just talking about earlier, all the different devices that different users may have throughout, different partnerships and those things that are happening and that you got going on externally. There's so much to protect against if you are an educational institution. So it
Right.
sounds like the work is really tough and so many different angles that can be potentially exploited that need to be shored up against.
Yes. And again, as we talked about before, it's the basic cyber practices. The best practices that were good 5 years ago are now even more important now. Again, we're talking about multi-factor authentication, password strength, fostering a culture of security and ethics. So that end user training, having that top down mentality, because if the senior executive of the organizations do not take it serious, why should anyone else in the organization? So if they see executives doing things they shouldn't be doing, both on the internet or with data, that just increases the risk or the mentality for the organization as a whole to increase that risk. Yeah. So look at that. The end user training as well is very important.
So Jay, I know that you've been dropping a few gems at the organization and individual level throughout our conversation today, but want to just hold additional space now. Any best practices, additional advice you might offer at the org or individual level for folks trying to protect themselves, in this new world of, constant threats, but also now constant threats with things like artificial intelligence enhancing those threats?
Right. Especially on the user side, the consumer side, to be skeptical of communications that are coming in. Because we talked about, now we have the AI generated video and audio. Just be very skeptical and look for inconsistencies. So if you're getting a video or that audio, listen for those, the dead silence, the dead space in there. I seen a video come out a while back that had the person that had 6 fingers. It was a very good video, but the person then had 6 fingers. So AI is going to make mistakes, but as it learns more, it's going to adapt to those. But just be really and looking for those fake emails and those fake identities coming through. So very important is to enable multi-factor authentication. If it's available, use it. So multi-factor authentication is that next level of protection. So even if I'm able to capture your username and password, and as you've seen, we're able to capture your password, a common password you have, if you have multi-factor authentication, that stops the attack, because that's that second level. So once I come in and put in a username and password, it's going to ask for authentication. Maybe it's on your phone or an email that you would have that will not allow us to get that access to that system.
Yeah, and
So
as
it's
you
those
just
are the
said,
basics.
that authentication is when, like, you put in your password and then it says, "Oh, go to your phone and enter these, like, 6 numbers now, this," or it
Yes.
may says, like, "Check." That's what you're referring to, right? When you say
Yes,
that?
absolutely. And then said that there's different, you could set up to have a phone call. So you have to put in a code when it calls you. It could be an app on your phone, like Google Authenticator, or some of the other ones where it's tied to your account and it'll have a pop up and you'll have to put the code into the application. So there's definitely different ways to do that. Some are more secure than others.
And Jay, if anyone was interested in partnering with Symasis or learning more about what you all do for their organization, what would you advise them to do next? How can they reach out to you?
No, absolutely. So basically you can find out more information about Symasis at symasis.com. That's symasis.com, and reach out to us. And I've always been on the other side of the table for
In a
most of
world
my
with
career.
artificial
So now
intelligence,
I know
how do
what I
we
want to
transform
see from
education?
a company that's one to partner with me.
Thanks for tuning in.
We want to
I'm
make sure
Daniel
that we're
Lopez,
understanding
and this is the
your
AI
risk to your
Education
organizations and your
Conversation,
pain points
where
and
we
how we
explore the
can do
opportunities,
that. It
risks,
might be us,
and
and it might be
impacts of
recommending you
AI
another
across
organization if we're not
education.
able to
If you'd like to
meet
join the
these.
conversation, check out
Yeah,
the AI
that's
Education
great.
Jay Hochstetler, thank you for your conversation
Awesome.
today. Really
Let's
appreciate
jump
having
in.
you on.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me.